Welcome to our monthly LinkedIn Live with Shape Talent. We are so delighted to have you join us. We've had some technical issues with the streaming platform, not at our end, we promise you. So we are recording this today and delighted that you're able to take time to catch up and watch it. In a moment, I will introduce you to Shape Talent's LinkedIn Live Breaking Barriers guest this month, Dr. Andre Bates. Great to have you with us, Andre.
It's a pleasure to be here.
But before I do that, let me just remind people, set the scene. So we hop on LinkedIn, normally, easily, every month. We bring you a topic related to the important issue of diversity, equity and inclusion. Shape Talent, for whom I'm a senior facilitator, are a DEI consultancy working with big global companies who are serious about gender equity. And we do that as consultants, but also with women's leadership programs, delivering bespoke programs to companies who are serious about tackling gender equality and gender equity. But today, in our LinkedIn Live, we are, as always, bringing in an expert related to DEI. We are spanning all sorts of topics, and a great one today, how AI, how artificial intelligence is shaping the trajectory of gender equity, which is a bit of a mouthful. The way I put it when I posted was just to say AI is a feminist issue. And I know Andre Bates is the person to tell us why that is. And over the next 25 minutes or so, we are going to chat about this really important, difficult, challenging, interesting, exciting topic of AI. So Andre, I know that you are the CEO and founder of Eularis. You're a pioneer in using artificial intelligence, specifically in pharma marketing. So you've spent 21 years solely focused on pharmaceutical AI. So you're streets ahead of most of us who are just catching up with this. You guest lecture on innovation using AI in healthcare for multiple university MBA programs. Translate that for us mere mortals who are still at the early stages of AI. What is the kind of work that you're doing which relates to AI?
Well, we work actually throughout the value chain in pharma. So when we started back in the day, it was really in the commercial space, which we still do. But that could be things like finding rare disease patients. And I can talk about many different case studies, but, rare diseases and ultra rare disease are diseases that 99.9% of doctors will never see a patient in their lifetime. So it's very hard to diagnose and find those patients. So that's kind of where, in the early days, sort of one of the first sort of interesting projects that we did. But we also work in sales, we work in market access, so getting drugs to market in terms of value pricing and faster reimbursement. We work in medical affairs, we work in regulatory, we work in clinical. There's so much going on in pharma, actually, in AI these days that's so exciting. So if you want me to talk about that, I'm happy to.
Well, I might well come back to that, but I'm going to start a little bit broader as well. It's great to know where you're coming from, but I know that you know an awful lot about AI generally, and some of our attendees today, people listening in, are often working within an HR capacity. And I know AI is doing a lot. People are taking a lot of interest in AI in things like recruitment and trying to find good people, but cut out the middleman to try and streamline that process. I mean, a lot of us, when we think AI, simply think ChatGPT. We're at that kind of level. But what else is going on that we should all be aware of when it comes to the world of work, whether that's pharma or more broadly?
Well, AI is a lot more than, obviously, ChatGPT. And that's actually one subtype of a subtype of a subtype. AI itself is a group of lots of different techniques. And would you like me to explain what AI is in general?
Yeah.
Just to put it in perspective. So AI is really the ability of machines or computers to analyze huge amounts of data and do things with it, essentially. So make predictions, find patterns, generate new information, of which ChatGPT is an example. So there's lots of different techniques that we can use and combinations of techniques we can use. But in the world of work, there's a lot of examples of it being used in HR, but also in terms of recruitment, as you were saying. And there's a lot of disaster stories in that space, but there's also a lot of good stories in that space. So I could start with some of the disaster stories, and then we could move on to some of the good, if you like.
Let's take it from the bad to the good stuff.
Okay.
It's really interesting.
So one of the very famous situations that happened, I can't remember the exact year, but I think it was roughly 2017. Amazon decided to put AI on their recruitment. And so with AI, everything is about the data. So they put resumes of some of their team into the training data, which is what you train AI on. And it learned, okay, these are good people. And so then new resumes that came into the system, it would then analyze and say, is this fit or not? And so it was hiring all these good people and things seemed to be going well until a few months in, someone said, we haven't hired a woman in a long time. So they went back and looked at the algorithm and they realized that the only resumes that they'd put in there were male resumes. And so they took the gender tag off and they went back to it, still kept hiring men. And what they didn't realize is that women use very different language than men in their resumes, and probably in general. We tend to use different phrases for certain things. So they had to go back and actually put female resumes in there for it to be a little bit more equitable. So that's one of the early situations. That's a really good example. And then, of course, there was in the UK, HMRC basically using AI where there's not even a human involved in the entire process. So I'm not as familiar, apart from what's been written in the paper, with their system. But all of these negative examples that you see out there are really because the data that the algorithms, I mean, it can be the algorithms as well, but in the majority of cases, it's the data that the algorithms are trained on, that they're not really the right way. But there are a few companies that are doing very cool work in this space. And I actually have a podcast, I've interviewed both of them. One was Talenya. And what they do is they use AI to find the most diverse, suitable person for the job. And what they told me, and this was a few years ago, I interviewed them, was that a lot of the traditional ways and systems of searching for people tend to be very much based on keywords or previous roles, whereas their AI will look at what roles someone's done and what skills would be required for that role and actually hire out of left field because these are the right skills for the job, even if that person's never done that job before. And they actually boast that the way they're doing it now with AI actually leads to a very diverse talent pool. So it was very impressive. And then I met another woman, Christine Agabonbon, who started a company called Black Up Tech. And she also has an AI that does recruitment to find Black tech professionals. And she's really looked at the data on that really strongly. So we are seeing these glimmers of hope of getting much more diversity from AI, in fact. So AI is part of the problem, but part of the solution, depending on how you do it, essentially. Yeah. And then, sorry?
No, go ahead. You sounded like you had another nugget for us.
Well, I think that, that's something that is really important, is that diversity in the team to do it, because, we see so often that, it's just missing a whole group. I can give you an example from medicine. Google have got a dermatological skin analyzer. So if you've got a mole that looks a bit suspicious, you can take a picture of it and scan it with their analyzer. Great results, 99% accurate on white skin. Put it onto black skin, it's 65% accurate, because they clearly didn't have enough black skin in their training data, because they didn't think of it, because they didn't have a diverse enough team working on it. If they had people from lots of different races working on that team, they would have spotted that really quickly. Yeah. So it's really about having that diverse team. And we know there's so many stats out there, not just in AI, but in general, that having a diverse team actually leads to much better outcomes for companies.
So what we've kind of highlighted there from looking at the things where it's gone wrong and the cases that are really using AI powerfully, and we're seeing that the potential of it, I'm sensing two things, that where we have to be really mindful, and this is, I guess, where people listening will want to kind of think about how are we as a company using AI, is the data is important. What you're feeding the machine has got to be a fair and accurate representation of society. And of course, historically, data may be skewed towards the mainstream, as it were, and doesn't have the diversity. So the data is important.
Yeah.
And then also there is still a human element. So perhaps people who are working on a team designing a piece of AI need to be, I guess, challenged, or we need to check their own sort of lived experience, their own background, this issue of have they got diversity amongst themselves and diversity of thought. So
yes,
what do we do with those realizations?
I guess the way that I mean, because actually AI can help diversity, as we've seen with Talenya and Black Up Tech, etc. But without that diversity, it's going to be harder. And so I think the first thing, I mean, every AI project we've ever done, that part which we call data wrangling, which is really firstly identifying that you've got the right data, checking that it's fair and balanced, because that's a big issue in pharma in general, that we always have to check fair and balance of everything that we do for our regulations. But checking that it's fair and balanced in a whole range of different areas. It very much depend on what you're doing with the data, because, if it's market access, you're looking at numbers, pricing, etc. But it's really making sure that you've got all of that. But then you've also got to clean the data, structure the data. Little things in there that aren't clean can really mess things up as well. But if there is any bias in that data, then that bias gets amplified with AI, and that's really dangerous. So firstly, you need that diversity of teams, good teams, but you also need good governance around this data. So, AI really, basically, you need to check that it's not biased, but you need to be accountable and have governance around how the data is planned, how the system is built, how the training data is collected and used. So there's a lot of different issues on top of the data around design, development, and even implementation. And of course, monitoring is another big thing, because, systems can degrade if dirty data gets in.
Yeah, I love some of the terms here, that the data needs to be clean. You can have dirty data.
Yeah.
Hearing you talk about the fact that we have to be able to check that data and get high quality. How do we do that? Because I guess when you're looking at a data set, this idea that we want that to be unbiased, that ought to be clean as possible. What are some of the processes that companies can employ to feel that there is an integrity to the data they're using?
There's a lot of checklists and things to do that anyway, but there's also algorithms. The data scientists, once they've identified all the areas, they will write algorithms to check that the data is clean. Because as you can imagine, these data sets are huge. They can't really have a human just looking through 15 million pieces of content. So they figure out what's required, and then they write algorithms to check the integrity, the volume, the clarity. And so I should probably explain what dirty data could be.
Yeah, please.
Because a lot of people may not understand what that is. And it's a really easy concept, but basically, whatever you're training has to be, the data has to be clean. So, for example, using it again, I'm too into my jargon. I'll give you a really simple example, because I've used this when I was giving a lecture at Henley. If you're training image training, so you've got all these different images, and the example I gave was pictures of guitars. So you're training the AI to recognize that this is a guitar. And so you've got, millions of images of guitars. But if some of those images have a cat walking in the background, of which some did, then what you will get is, when the AI sees a picture of a cat, it will say with pretty strong confidence that that's a guitar. So you really need to make sure that the data is just the data, and not, lots of different elements in there. It's got to be super, super tight on what you're training. And even with, if I'm thinking about sort of data around doctors, say you're trying to use AI to identify who's the top key opinion leaders, you've got to be very careful, because you might have multiple doctors with the same names, and some of them could be the same doctor because they've just moved and they're in the database twice, or some could be different doctors that actually are separate people with the same name. So there's a lot of different things that you've got to look at in any data set, just to make sure that it is clean and there's none of these inaccuracies.
Yeah, thank you. Those examples are so interesting. In a way, we're sort of in this strange vortex where we're talking about tech and AI, and some of the ways of checking are also tech and AI, and not AI, algorithms and building software and things like that. So I wonder that the human element is also so important. We touched on it earlier. And I guess one of the other concerns that people have in the AI space is the people who are designing these products and these programs are historically probably more likely to be male, because we know that the tech industry is more male dominated. So if we want to ensure a diversity of thought and a diversity in the design and the approach and people being ready to catch bias, we want to get more women involved in AI generally.
Yes.
What are we seeing on that front?
Yeah, wow, it's not pretty. Women are very underrepresented in AI, and there's different stats depending on which paper you look at. But in the big tech companies in the West, so probably in the big tech companies globally, but in the big tech companies, it's 20% women, 80% men. And if you take that down to the data science level, it's 12% women, 88% men. And so we really are very underrepresented. And you see that in Google, you see that in Meta, you see that in all of the big tech. But what's really interesting to me is that those 12% of women have 13 times the number of patents that those 88% of men have. So the women that are in AI are actually very, very good at what they do. And they're not just doing it for a career. They obviously clearly are excellent at it. So there was a study in 24, actually, Zeki, they did a report, Women in AI, for 2024. And they found something interesting as well, which was that women leave the big tech companies very, very soon. Within 2 years, 60% of new employees are left. But a lot of the women leave because of the way that they're treated. I remember there was a Google engineer that went public saying that women can't do AI because their brains are different. And the data doesn't show that, because if you look in countries like India or China or even Nigeria, it's 50-50 men, women. So that also raises some questions. Why is it that in the West, and particularly in these big tech companies, it's not 50-50? Is that biases amongst the leaders? Is that bias? I mean, it seems to be women will join the companies, but they leave because they're badly treated. So there's quite a lot of data showing that now. So women in AI tend to then set up their own business or work in smaller companies because they are treated better and they can do what they excel at.
Yeah. So it sounds like a retention issue to a large extent. It was
to a degree, yeah. But they were also, in the 60s, women were the dominant gender in tech. And then in the 70s, it started to change, whereby I suppose also the power of the tech became more obvious to people, but it started to become more and more male dominated in the 70s. And now it's very male dominated. But it wasn't in the beginning, because it was seen as a female profession because it was kind of white collar. So it was very different.
Yeah. So interesting kind of societal shifts as well. Just before I ask you a question about what we do about that, I was just reflecting on the fact that people often remark that even the way that women are positioned in AI is not always helpful. So, for example, I need to be careful what I say here because I have a device, but Siri and the one beginning with A, L-A-E-X-A, I'm not going to say it, so they're going to have all kinds of...
She may be able to spell.
Yes, she's probably that clever. But those are women's voices who you get to command these women to do things for you and tell me this and, set me this alarm and, empty my fridge or whatever it is. There's something culturally that some people have said is off with AI as well.
Well, and I'm not sure whether I should go down this road, but that can be taken a lot further because, there's a whole industry of female sex robots. And, I've seen 2 documentaries on these. And the only reason I even found out about this was I was on LinkedIn and a sex robot profile reached out to me to connect. And I remember looking at this woman on the profile thinking, oh, who is she? What is she? She works in robotics. And I had a look and it said sex robot. And she did look a little bit, like she'd had too much plastic surgery, but she was a robot. But it suddenly made me go, this was years ago now. It was actually quite a while ago. But it made me think, that's weird. What's going on in this space? And I watched some documentaries about it, and there's these companies that are making these. In those days, it was 40,000 a robot. I don't know what it is now. These robots for sex, and men would buy them as their girlfriend. And they interviewed these men, and the men were saying, yes, she's the perfect girlfriend. We watch TV, we then go have sex. She never talks back. She's wonderful. And so it was quite disturbing, actually, seeing that. It's really strange.
Yeah, a really interesting example. And so I wonder, given some of the misgivings around the sort of cultural challenges around AI and where women fit, and keeping women, encouraging them into, the industry, retaining them while we're here. I mean, you're very much embedded in the industry. Do you sense there is a willingness and awareness to tackle that issue of we need more women involved? And are you seeing any good practice?
It depends on the organization. I'm not seeing it in big tech, for sure. Wow. There may be lip service, but I haven't really seen any. They are very male-oriented companies, for sure. Certainly in pharmaceuticals, in my industry, it is much more trying to get women in all areas of the businesses. So, I think that as an industry, we're a lot more open to that. But I think tech, it's going to be a harder challenge, for sure.
Yeah. Well, hopefully we'll start to see change. I think you may know, well, I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I sense that there are now organizations for women in AI. There are sort of only AI organizations that are trying to really kind of lead the way in the debate on some of this and set things up themselves. Yeah. People listening who maybe are joining us from a DEI background, they maybe don't work in the tech industry, but they know that AI will be coming into their business, their organization as well. So people who are curious and are mindful of this issue, that artificial intelligence may have an impact on gender equity, but they maybe are not embedded in the high-end tech of it, what should they be thinking about? If you're going into organizations who are saying, right, we're starting to dabble in AI, how do we keep ourselves aware of the potential pitfalls? What would your advice be?
Well, I think it's, firstly, as we talked about the data, there was another example that just came to mind of during COVID, where some schools in the UK were using AI to do the grading. And what they found is that the AI actually favored people from affluent backgrounds, and the people from disadvantaged backgrounds were really got a lot worse marks than they did in their schools, and it was down by about 40%. So it showed that the data that system was trained on was very, very biased. And so I think in any organization, that's where you start, is the data. But as we were saying, with the data on top of the algorithms and everything to do it, you need a diverse data team as well. And so anyone in HR needs to be looking at diversity in their teams, particularly in AI. And as I said before, there are AI systems that do that are just focused on tackling that issue and doing it very well. I gave you 2, but there's probably many by now, because those I've met 2 or 3 years ago. So I think that is another area that people could look at. And if you are looking at an AI system that does that, talk to their customers, find out about the results of the system. It's very important to make sure that the systems you use are done very well, and find out about the teams making them and the data in them. But, I think that's the key, is, having enough of an understanding of what you're working with to be able to ensure that any AI tools you're using to help diversity and equity, inclusion are strong tools.
Yeah, thanks. Great advice. And thank you for some of those places that we can go and look. The other thing that strikes me is my starting point was ChatGPT, just because that at the moment tends to be the kind of AI equals ChatGPT. As you so pointed out, that is a subsection of a subsection. It's generative AI.
Yes.
It's worth us thinking about perhaps the challenges there, because from my understanding, and please correct me, but things like ChatGPT are very different to the kind of AI you're talking about with these data sets. Internally, people perhaps looking at pharma or education or recruitment, they are taking their data from perhaps in-house. They're using their own stuff, or stuff that is hopefully very clean because it's come from a reputable source. those more open AI systems that a lot of people might be using in their work. I've been using a couple of things this week just to help me generate some ideas around workshops that I was delivering. I guess the issue with things like that is the source of that information is much broader, maybe dirtier, to use your word. It's a bit more of a free-for-all out there.
It shouldn't be, though, and there are many generative AI systems and models that aren't a free-for-all, that are accurate. That, again, comes down to the team and the company that we're doing it. And so, obviously, there's a lot of potentially ethical issues going on in that company. As you know, there's a current lawsuit where Scarlett Johansson was refused to let them use her voice, and then there was a deep fake of her voice, so she's taken them to court. There's a lot of lawsuits because some of the practices that were done weren't what you would expect. But there are many generative AI systems out there that actually have used clean data. They've checked the data. They haven't just scraped, the entire internet, but they've actually checked the data. And we use generative AI all the time in pharma, but we use systems that the data's been checked. They're reputable data sources. We know the accuracy. And the other thing is with LLMs, ChatGPT is a large language model. Everyone keeps thinking, they definitely always hallucinate. No, not necessarily. You can get LLMs really fine-tuned. There's so many techniques. We've got RAG benchmark, RAG truth. We've got fuse shot, fine-tuning. There's a whole heap of techniques to really train it to not get it to hallucinate. So there's a lot of negatives that come from ChatGPT, for example, that aren't necessarily there in all of those models.
Yeah, good to know. And you alluded there to something that I want to pick up on, because you also mentioned it earlier, which was around sort of regulation and governance. So the superstructures that sit above this, like who's policing this, who's helping us get it right. Because at the moment, it sounds from what you're saying like a lot of that responsibility falls on individuals, organizations themselves who are using AI, and of course the companies that are developing these AI systems. And perhaps if we don't get it right, we risk people being a little bit the Wild West. And yet, if we over-regulate, maybe we kill some of the creativity. Where do you stand on that?
It's a difficult one because we are doing some good things with regulation to protect people in Europe, but that's not going to happen in many other places. So, certainly it won't be happening ever in China. In the US, it's happening in pockets, but let's face it, some of the activities we're seeing from some of the tech companies, clearly they're not going to be, voting for that kind of governance. So, my friends in AI are divided. I like a lot of the protection, but it doesn't work if it doesn't work globally. It really needs to be a global initiative. Then we can all actually benefit from it. But if one country is doing something completely different, it means that, the bad AI, if we call it that, is out there. And it also does tie the hands of some people depending on what the regulations are. We did a project many years ago where children would die from not getting treated. It was an ultra-rare disease. And you could tell from the pictures of these children's faces whether they had the condition or not, because it was very syndromic. And so we actually used face recognition to find these children and save their lives. But we wouldn't be allowed to do that today because face recognition is one of those areas that in Europe we can't do. So there's good and bad. It's a difficult balance for sure.
Yeah. Thank you. We're almost at time. I have one more question for you, but before I ask it, I'm just going to thank everybody who has been watching. We're sorry we couldn't bring this to you live as we normally do, but absolutely, Andre and I will return to this. We'll be looking at the comments. So please, if you have questions, if you have reflections, if you have insights, do share them. We will keep an eye on that. Andre, if people want to continue this conversation with you, how's the best way to connect?
LinkedIn.
Yeah, we're on LinkedIn and we like it here.
Yes.
So fantastic. And for us at Shape Talent, as I say, we organize these monthly LinkedIn lives as a way of generating more conversation around the whole issue of DEI and its many facets. And if your organization is serious about getting DEI right, then by all means have a call with us, reach out, connect with myself, with Sharon Peake, our CEO, if you're thinking about, are we getting this right in terms of what we are doing for women in our organization. Next month, we will be talking to Jen Barnett from Grant Thornton Professional Services Network. And our topic on July the 25th at 2:00 is building a culture that enables the attraction and retention of women, something that at Shape Talent we are hugely invested in, getting that culture right, retaining, attracting women, exactly what Andre and I were talking about just a few short moments ago. So just as we wrap up then, let me just ask you this, Andre, because we've roamed, haven't we, from the really positive, the possibility, the excitement that is generated by AI, into the difficulties, the potential pitfalls and the challenges. We know things are moving very fast and we need to keep up with that. So I wonder, if we don't act, we risk kind of embedding unfair practices in AI. We risk getting it wrong. How confident are you that we can get this right and that we can ensure that we're creating AI that is just and equitable?
Well, I'm very confident we can if we let it. AI actually can help us in this in lots of ways, but you need to make sure that the people working on it are aware of these issues and actually can do that kind of thing. So I think that it's definitely possible. It just needs humans to be doing the right thing to allow it.
Yeah. Andre, thank you so much for your time today. That's a great parting thought, that there is so much promise here, but we also need to be mindful. And we as human beings need to do the right thing and be across all of the complexities of this. You've helped us do some of that today, certainly for me, because a lot of this is new territory. I'm really grateful. Thank you so much. And thank you for listening. And we look forward to seeing you for our next LinkedIn Live next month, as I say, on July the 25th. Bye-bye.
Thank you.